Today we're at the Oakley Mansion, thanks to the Historic Mobile Preservation Society, and we're being filmed today by the University of South Alabama Libraries, Art Galleries, and we're going to be talking about the Mardi Gras Doubloon, and in particular the Mobile Mardi Gras Doubloon. Doubloons should be like a time capsule, so collectors 500 years down the road would know what we did at this point. Is a quote from a guy by the name of H. Alvin Sharp, and we'll be talking about Mr. Sharp here shortly. But in the meanwhile, I want to give you some information about what constitutes a doubloon and what types of doubloons there are out there. Doubloons can be any object, really. You would say it'd have to be round, but now it doesn't have to necessarily be round. But it typically commemorates something Mardi Gras related, whether it be a ball or a parade or both. And it can be made in different materials: plastic, such as this one, wooden, like this one, and of course many people have got these off the floats. They're aluminum. Now the aluminum can be made in two different thicknesses. This particular one, and the ones you see thrown off the street, onto the street off the floats, is a 15 gauge aluminum, which constitutes the thickness of it. This particular doubloon can be made in bright aluminum, as you see here, which means that it was struck just as it is. The material's rolled out, cut into what's called planchets or blanks, and then the impression is imprinted on both sides of the coin. It can also be anodized different colors, which anodizing is basically an electrochemical process in which the surface of the aluminum is dyed different colors. You've seen them in purple, green, and gold, and blue and red, even black. And these are used basically as coins or tokens that are thrown out during balls or off floats during Mardi Gras. Then you have what the collectors called were heavies. The heavies are basically bronze coins that the basic planchet to it is a brass planchet, unless you have them made overseas somewhere like China where they may be a zinc alloy instead of brass. It's struck just like the aluminum, and then it's basically finished in different ways. You can have it what's called a bright bronze, which is kind of a mirrored finish, but it's not treated with anything. It's the planchet, just like the aluminum, is struck, and then it's kind of polished, and that's used as a commemorative coin, something that is given typically to members and guests and that sort of thing. It can also be done in different platings, like an antique copper or antique bronze platings where there's an antique finish to it. And these typically are, the heavies are typically in a 10 gauge fashion. They can even be enameled as this one is. It's basically struck and plated and then hand painted, in some cases with hypodermic needles to get the small little details into the doubloon, and then in some cases it's covered over with an epoxy cover, and sometimes it's not. It can even be plated in a black nickel plated, such as this one. There are 3 different types of reliefs for these doubloons. The low relief one is typically done for one-dimensional artwork or with wording. Then there's a regular relief die, and that relief die has a 3-dimensional look that actually does not stick up off the rim, the height of the rim. So you can look at it from the side and it'll look smooth with nothing sticking up. And then you have what's called a high relief die, in which when the platchet struck, the relief of the die, the 3-dimensional relief of the die, extends up over the rim. So those are the basics of what a doubloon is. Again, the wooden nickels can be either ink imprinted or foil printed. So there are some different determinations of what can be used based on what's available. So today we're going to talk about the history of the doubloon. Most collectors and historians believe the first one that was minted by the Rex organization in New Orleans in 1885. It was minted and produced to commemorate the 1885 World's Industrial and Cotton Centennial Exposition in New Orleans. That expo, which was located where Audubon Park is now, was meant to bring people in tourists into New Orleans. Rex participation in that was also to give those coming to see the expo this feel, this taste of carnival in New Orleans. And so they commemorated this event by having this first doubloon produced. It's rumored that really nobody wanted them, which was kind of interesting because they're quite sought after now. In series about 1910 through 1915, there was some commercially made tokens that the collectors referred to as Mobile Naval Dock. They were produced for Mobile Carnival, most likely commercially, and were the size of a nickel. So there were some early efforts to make some type of commemorative coin for Carnival, whether it be in New Orleans or Mobile. But today we're going to talk about the modern day, the one that you see thrown off the floats, the ones that people collect on a regular basis, both in New Orleans, Mobile, and other places. And we're going to start in 1959. Alvin Sharp was a guy who described himself as a Kentucky hillbilly who came to New Orleans in 1931. He was a very interesting guy. He was an artist. He was a sculptor. He was a writer. He was an inventor. And he was also a seaman. He actually served in the Merchant Marines during World War II. And while we're talking about Sharp got this idea that during Carnival that there should be a token in what he nicknamed a doubloon to be thrown during the celebration. He arranged a meeting with a guy by the name of Darwin Finner, who was actually the captain of the Rex organization at the time. He showed up at his office And with Sharp, it's interesting because there are multiple, for every story with Sharp, there's always a second story with Sharp. So there's multiple theories about everything that Sharp did. But in this case, we're going with what Sharp said. It was quoted saying that on November 5th of 1959, he showed up at Fenner's office in New Orleans, and he tossed about 30 of his prototype aluminum doubloons into the face of Fenner. Now, Sharp said, I know he probably thought I was a little crazy, but what Sharp was trying to demonstrate to Fenner was that it could be safely tossed from a float without hurting anyone. So once Fenner kind of got over the shock of what had happened to him, Fenner and Sharp started to talk about how this was going to come about. What would it take to make these? And it would be a very short time, even though Mardi Gras in 1960 was in March, in early March, it would still take some time and effort to get these produced and into New Orleans for the 1960 festivities. There's rumors that Sharp had to go to Chicago, a company he probably used, Green Duck Corporation in Chicago, for the manufacturing of it. But there's also other stories in which Blaine Kern was involved and had them produced in Ohio. Either way, they got produced and was used for the 1960 carnival event, the Rex Parade in New Orleans. So there's stories that Sharp and Fenner had to actually go to the rail yard in an unpacked rail car that had the doubloons on it the Friday before their event, so they would have the weekend to bag them up. It's been reported that they cost 3 cents a piece. There are some reports that said the riders didn't know they even had them and discovered them once they got on the float. There are stories that most of them got thrown before they even got to Canal Street on the route. And there's also stories that the public heard that they were actually throwing money, and there was a few little fisticuffs that broke out to try to get this new doubloon that Alvin Sharp had actually named. There was 80,000 of the bright aluminum being the unfinished, and there were 3,000 that were anodized gold. There were some silvers produced for the Rex organization itself, members of that. There were some bronzes, I think, that may have been given as favors. But for the most part, the effort was for the aluminum. And interestingly enough, they did not date it. It was undated because I believe Fenner was kind of concerned that even though he liked it, what would the crowd do? But they quickly found out that it was a crowd favorite. So in 1961, Rex, to the delight of the New Orleans carnival crowd and nationwide collectors, because basically now it become a collectible item, repeated what they did in 1960, but this time they put the theme on it and dated it, 1961. In Alabama, it was not until 1962 that the first doubloon was actually produced. Most people would guess it would have been Infant Mystics or the Order of Mists, the Knights of Revelry, or the Crew of Columbus, or Mystic Strikers. But in this case, the first aluminum doubloon that was minted for Carnival goes to the Crew of Phantom Host in Montgomery, Alabama. In 1962, the Crew of Phantom Host was making an effort to revive Carnival in Montgomery. Montgomery had, from the mid-1870s through history, had off and on tried to get carnival started in Montgomery, much like New Orleans and Mobile, but it never, ever took hold. In this case, it has taken hold, although the Creole Phantom Host stopped parading about 1971. But they still do exist and have a ball to this day. In New Orleans, the crews of Araby, Babylon, Iris, Poseidon, and Venus all produced coins, doubloons, for the first time for their carnival event. The same year, Green Duck Corporation that I mentioned earlier decides to move their operation to from Chicago, Illinois to Hernando, Mississippi. And Hernando is a small town just south of Memphis. So Mobile had to wait 4 years, actually 5 years, before they actually saw a doubloon thrown on the streets of Mobile. In 1965, the first aluminum doubloon was thrown by the Infant Mystics during their 1965 parade. The theme was Mystics, Merriment, and Art. And the design on the doubloon was actually designed by Alvin Sharp. They produced the bright aluminum. They also produced a bright bronze, an oxidized silver-plated finished bronze, and a 1 ounce silver doubloon for their first-time effort in getting a doubloon made. In 1966, they repeated that effort with the theme of World of Color. And Alvin Sharp had also designed that particular doubloon. In 66, Sharp starts producing what a lot of collectors refer to as bunny date doubloons. The front of it had a large bunny head on it, and it had the words "Be here" or "Be yourself," along with "Bring mass, go places." The back of it, well, the front of it still said Mardi Gras, and the back of it had the dates of Mardi Gras from 1967 through 1971. So the future dates was minted on the doubloon. There was a version that was minted for Mobile that said Mardi Gras and Old Mobile that existed from 1967 to 1970. The New Orleans version of it said Mardi Gras and Old New Orleans, and that existed from 1966 through 1970. And there was also a third version that Sharp produced that said Mardi Gras in Cajun Land, and that was from 1967 to 1970. So Sharp had already started, once he'd convinced them of using doubloons, then he got into the process of getting them manufactured by some of the companies there that were located in the U.S. at that time. In 1967, the second Mobile group has a doubloon, the Order of Miss, to commemorate their 100th anniversary celebration that year. They produced a bright aluminum, an antique bronze, and a silver, 1 ounce silver doubloon for their occasion. The bunny date that I was talking about with Alvin Sharp, he produces one in Mobile that's a gold anodized aluminum. It becomes the first anodized coin to be used in Mobile's carnival. And Sharp actually made that in a bronze and a silver doubloon also. In 1967, the first doubloon to commemorate a carnival group's royalty was produced. It was produced for the Mystics of Time's Queen Darlene. It was roughly about 1 1/4 inches, about size, a little bit larger than a quarter. It had a penny located in the middle of it. It's supposed to be a lucky penny. And that would be the first doubloon produced for royalty in Mobile. In 1968, the Barco Mint opens in New Orleans as a local manufacturer of doubloons there in New Orleans. It started by two guys, John Barr and his friend Bill Cox. John owned a machine shop, and Bill worked for American Can Company. And between the two of them, they used modified surplus minting machines that they acquired from the U.S. Mint and started producing doubloons. They were competing with some of the other mints in the U.S. that was now starting to produce them, including the Hamilton Mint, the Osborne Mint, which was located in Cincinnati, Ohio, and Ring Duck, which had moved to Hernando. It was producing doubloons. In 1968, the Infamistic celebrated their 100th anniversary, and they actually had produced a bright aluminum, gold aluminum doubloons to be thrown, an ox silver for collectible purposes, and a 1 ounce silver doubloon. The gold anodized aluminum doubloon becomes the first non-commercial anodized doubloon to be used in a Mobile Carnival celebration. So as you can see, there was multitudes of firsts starting to happen, starting in Mobile in 1965, and starting to ramp up. And it starts to really ramp up once you get into the 1970s. In 69, the Stripers produces a wooden nickel for their celebration, the first one, that can be attributed to a group. The crew of Columbus manufactures their first doubloon in 1969, showing Columbus's ship Nina on it. They produce a bright aluminum, an antique bronze, and a fine silver. Crew of Columbus, though, would be the first group to produce a 1 ounce solid gold doubloon. According to some of the members that I've talked to, they believe it sold for about $75 each in 1969. And to put that in perspective, the gold price for an ounce of gold right now is running about $1,800. The same year, the first Mobile women's group would produce a doubloon. That would be the Maids of Mirth. In this case, though, they produced only an antique bronze and a silver. There was no aluminum produced. And the antique bronze was also used as a paperweight, which was used as a favor for the group in that year. But the group would follow suit and have their first street plain aluminum produced in 1970, which is entitled Land of Make Believe. So now we're in the 1970s, and this is where it really kind of ramps up a little bit. 1971, King Felix becomes the first Mobile Carnival Association royalty to have a doubloon. It's actually a wooden nickel, painted yellow with a purple imprint, those being Mardi Gras colors. The 50 Funny Fellas becomes the first ball-only group, to create doubloons for their festivities. They produce about a gold and purple anodized aluminum for their function in 1971. But what was interesting, there was no bronzes or silvers produced, only the aluminum. Sometime in the early 70s, there was a gentleman by the name of Clifford Oliver Peters, and most of his friends knew him as C.O. Peters. He's from Mobile, but he actually lived in the Barnwell community in Baldwin County. And sometimes in the early 70s, Mr. Peters bought a machine from Quick Print of Jacksonville, Florida, and started printing wooden nickels using a hot stamp process that Quick Print machines can do to imprint wooden nickels. And he starts producing them for the carnival parading and ball groups in Mobile, in which he would continue to do it for many years. In 1972, the Mystic Stripers becomes the first group to offer their members a multicolored coin. That is a bronze coin that's actually been hand painted, and that would be the first that would be offered. Blanker in New Orleans for a number of years referred to that as a cloisonné doubloon, but it's not. It's actually an emerald doubloon. And Kern had actually had those manufactured in West Germany. That the Mystic Stripers also produced about 1,000 gold anodized aluminums that year. That according to one of the members, that the story was that only one member of the Stripers bought all 1,000 gold anodized aluminum doubloons. And because of that, it's probably one of the most rarest ones out there because the gentleman actually threw all of them. So they were distributed by one Mystic Striper. That year, they also produced a set of 3 10-gauge anodized aluminum doubloons that were 10-gauge. They were meant to be favors to be given to guests of some of the members. In 1974, the Order of Polka Dots celebrate their 25th anniversary with a 1¼ inch diameter doubloon that was produced in bright aluminum and also in silver. To give you a reference, this size is a 1½ inch. So the standard typically is 1½ inch, but there have been smaller ones made. In 1976, the first doubloon shows up during the Joe Cane Day festivities, which had begun with a bunch of walkers in 1967. It's a wooden nickel for the Joe Cane procession, and it honors Slacobama Ramaco's Lost Cause minstrels, and it's referred to as a 1 cane coin. These cane coins would continue until 1996, and there were 21 cane coins produced over that time. On Friday, March the 2nd, 1976, in the Mobile Register on page 15 was an article advertising a meeting to be held on the next day, March the 3rd, of a group newly organized called the Mobile Mardi Gras Doubloon Collectors Club. The meeting was to be held at the chemistry building at the Spring Hill College campus. And the article invites any of those that are interested to attend to help set up objectives and bylaws of the new club. The founder of this club was John McFall, and the club would continue to meet monthly, mostly on the second Wednesday night of every month, for years to promote the hobby of doubloon collecting. So by 1976, there was a club set in place to start the process of collecting doubloons. And you can see here on this is their logo. They would continue their efforts up until the early 90s when they finally disbanded, and they would produce originally they produced a checklist, and each year they would update that checklist with information about what doubloons were minted that particular season. In 1977, Popeyes Fried Chicken Chain becomes the first commercial company to distribute a redeemable carnival doubloon during Mobile's 1977 season. It was red anodized aluminum, and they also produced a 10-gauge bronze for collectors. It was also distributed during the Carnival in New Orleans, and it offered a quarter of a fried chicken dinner. In 1978, the Mystics of Children, which had begun in 1965 as a kids' carnival in the Rosswood neighborhood of Mobile, produces their first official doubloon, a wooden nickel, and it's themed the months of the year. Also in 1978, the Creole Cavaliers hit the streets for the first time, tossing their newly minted bright aluminum and blue aluminum doubloons entitled Hello Mobile, Maiden Voyage. But there was one slight problem to the Cavaliers doubloons. It seems that they were all dated 1977 by mistake. So if you see a County Cavalier doubloon from 1977, it was actually produced for the 1978 festivities. They produced an antique bronze, a gold-plated bronze, a fine silver doubloon for their members, and they were also one to produce a 1 ounce gold, solid gold doubloon for their first occasion. In 1979, the Order of Athena gets on board and mints a doubloon for their 25th anniversary celebration. They mint it in a plain gold and red aluminum doubloon that was thrown from their floats, along with an antique bronze, an ox silver, and a fine silver. Also, what shows up in 1979 was a series of R-rated carnival wooden nickels that commemorated Mardi Gras that actually had R-rating drawings on it, and that lasted for about 4 or 5 years. Also in 1979, Darwin Finner, the person I mentioned before with Rex, was involved with Sharp in producing doubloons, dies at the age of 71. In 1981, Mystics of Time decides to honor their float builder, Webb, for his 50 years of float building efforts. All their aluminum and their heavies are decorated with the theme, the Web of Time. And Webb Odom spelled his name with 2 B's. There would also be a wooden nickel commissioned for the occasion, and Odom himself was named Grand Marshal of the MOT's parade, and he would also have a wooden doubloon that he would toss that night. Also in 81, Mobile Carnival Association's Queen Laura Taylor becomes the first Mobile Carnival Queen to manufacture her own doubloon. She makes a replica of what King Felix III did in 1971, 10 years earlier, with a yellow-colored wooden nickel with purple imprint. In 1982, the ball group Bells and Bows produces a doubloon for their 25th anniversary. And sadly, in 1982, Alvin Sharp dies at his home in Algiers on the West Bank on October 22nd, 1982, at the age of 72 after a long illness. There's a memorial service that was held for him on Monday, October 25th in 1982. And after that memorial service, his body was cremated. So the father of the modern day doubloon passes away in 1982. 1984, the ball group, ball group 49ers produces a aluminum doubloon for their 30th anniversary. In 1985, Mobile celebrates the completion of the Tennessee-Tombigbee Waterway on June 1st, 1985. Now you're thinking, what's that got to do with Mardi Gras? Well, during that celebration, the city held a huge street parade that pretty much all the Mardi Gras groups that paraded in the streets of Mobile included floats in. So we kind of had Mardi Gras in June that year, and for the occasion, they actually minted a doubloon 15 gauge that was tossed from those floats that day. In 1986, the Pharaohs held their first parade on Sunday, February 2nd, 1986, with the theme Pharaoh's Coloring Book. They tossed 5 different colors of aluminum that year: bright gold, green, purple, and turquoise. And their royalty even had a color. Also in 1986, William Billy Ankerson, a float builder, enlists C.O. Peters to produce a wooden nickel for his company, Floats Incorporated. The nickel is unique because it's actually printed one side in one color and the other side in another. One side's green and one side's gold. Billy Ankerson had been involved with Mardi Gras for a number of years and just recently passed away. In 1989, a new group was formed called the Resurrected Cavaliers. And they would be the first to produce a very odd-shaped doubloon. And in this case, it was the shape of a cowbell. It would also be the first doubloon to be produced in South Korea. There were several, from aluminum to several colors. There was bronzes, a multicolor, and even a silver produced for this. And the Resurrected Cavaliers would continue this. They would put a theme on the back and use this logo over about a period of about 4 or 5 years before they finally disbanded. In 1989, the Order of Athena Marshals decided to produce their own enameled doubloon, which only had a mintage of 15. So there was only 15 of them produced, and they were also produced in South Korea. Also that particular year, a marching club called the Lafitte Marching Crew, and it was spelled Lafeet, would become the first marching club to have a doubloon in a Mobile parade. The group would parade several times with the Pharaohs. They paraded with the crew of Lafitte in Pensacola during that city's May Fiesta of Five Flags Festival, and also would participate in 1989 Greater Gulf States Fair opening that particular year. The group lasted about 3 years. Also in 1989, the city of Mobile would actually sponsor a float in the Rose Parade in Pasadena, California on New Year's Day. They produced aluminum, an antique bronze, and a fine silver doubloon for the occasion. It's kind of ironic that they did that because Alvin Sharp had mentioned prior to reaching out to the Rex organization about it that he had actually approached several nationwide celebrations about utilizing his new idea for a doubloon. And in this case, the Rose Parade in California was one of those that he had reached out to. In 1990, the Order of Lachies has their first year, and they have a wooden doubloon made and with the theme Angels Ready to Party, First Annual Ball. In 1991, the Marquis de Lafayette Society has their first ball and commissions a wooden nickel for that event. In 1992, the Order of Miss received their doubloons for their celebration, and they soon discovered there's an error to their newly minted doubloon. And in this case, one side of the doubloon actually had their 1992 theme embossed on it. And on the other side, the Mobile Ball Group Pirouette's emblem was included. So the order, there was a mistake at the mint. And so the order missed the doubloons that had their theme on one side and the Pirouette's logo on the other side. In 1996, the Barco Mint, which had opened in 1968, suffers a fire, and John Barr decides it's time to retire. His two sons, Peter and David, decide that they're going to repair the damage from the fire and restart the company, and they changed the name of Barco Mint to New Orleans Mint. In 1997, Neptune's Daughters hits the streets of Mobile for the first time, tossing a purple, a green, and gold lumens, all entitled Treasures of the Sea. In 1998, the Mobile Mystical Ladies holds their first function entitled Away We Go, and had at least an aluminum, bright aluminum, and a silver doubloon. In 2004, Green Duck Corporation, which most likely produced the very first modern day doubloons, closes their doors and no longer manufactures doubloons nor casino chips. They had actually got into the casino chip business for a while. the late 2000, from 2005 to 2010 or so, there was really not a lot that went on. In 2014, the first Chinese manufactured aluminum doubloons started to arrive in New Orleans. They're actually purchased mainly because they're cheaper, and the clubs could actually produce them in very odd shapes. But the production time goes from about 4 to 6 months to more like 6 to 10 months. So there has to be an early effort to get these made. There are some quality control issues with them, which is typical of especially Asian manufacturers. But yet there is no known, and I don't know of any, Chinese manufactured balloons that was ever and has ever been produced for the Mobile celebration. 2017, C.L. Peters dies at the age of 85. And in 2018, the New Orleans Mint closes their doors after being in business since 1968. And the company is bought by a company in Ramsey, Minnesota by the name of Wendell's Manufacturing. That brings us to 2021, pandemic time, very limited if any carnival celebration, but there was a doubloon produced during 2021. Infant Mystics produced a doubloon entitled Carrying On Tradition in the Face of Adversity for the Pandemic. There was also a yellow plastic token themed Pandemic, What Pandemic from the Loyal Order of the Banana of Fairhope, Alabama, which was tossed on the streets of Dolphin Streets on Mardi Gras Day. And the Crew of Sparta, a group in Saraland, also produced a bright aluminum for a drive-by Mardi Gras event that they held in Saraland on February 13th. So even in pandemic times, doubloons have been produced. So now we'll talk about why has doubloons actually been fewer in number than before. To give you an example, from 1991 to 2001, an unnamed Eastern Shore Carnival group went from producing 100,000 doubloons a year for their celebration to a total of 10,000 doubloons by 2001. But the volume had been cut by about 90%. I mean, it's only 10% of what they were throwing. In 1991, a bag from this group would have been sold for $25 a bag or a nickel a piece. And when you compare that to the original first doubloon that was minted in 1960s, those were rumored to be costing 3 cents a piece. So the cost of aluminum doubloons from 1960 to 1991 had only gone from 3 cents to a nickel a piece. And by the late 1990s, they were being sold at $50 a bag or 10 cents a piece. And that behavior by that group also reflected many of the carnival groups in Mobile. So why was there a tremendous change in something that was obvious that most people wanted? And in Sharp's mind, it was something that would last a long time. It was made out of metal. It would have the theme of the parade on it. There would be some historical aspect to the doubloon. So now we'll talk about a couple of the reasons that I think may have caused it. The first one is that the increased cost that I've just mentioned caused a decrease in the purchase of the coins. So as the groups increase the cost of the doubloon, then the volume of doubloons being ordered would be reduced. And the manufacturers were offering discounted prices for larger amounts. So as the groups ordered less and less, then the cost of those those doubloons that they were ordering was going up quite a bit. But that could be one of the reasons. Another reason could be Chinese-produced beads. In the late 80s and early 90s, there was a huge influx of pretty nice quality Mardi Gras beads being produced in China at very reasonable prices. And it could have been that the riders decided they'd rather throw nice beads than doubloons. One reason that's been mentioned is the increase in dye cost. I don't necessarily see that as much because even over that 10-year period, the cost of a dye only increased by about 10%. It would not necessarily be something that would affect that much of a reduction in the amount of doubloons we made. Another reason, most people like the anodized aluminum. And in the early 90s, there were some environmental laws that came about from EPA regarding hazardous waste disposal. And the anodizing process of doubloons, there is some hazardous waste that's generated, mostly acids that are generated from that production. So prior to the 1996 fire, the Barco Mint actually anodized most of their own doubloons, and then when they decided not to, they actually utilized local sources. But after 1996, it became a lot more difficult for them to do small, especially small amounts of anodizing. And so the New Orleans Mint eventually started using a Chicago-based company, which meant they had to ship the bright unanodized aluminum to Chicago, have them anodized, and then ship back to New Orleans before then they would distribute out to the groups. So that could have added to the cost of it. Over the period of years, I've got some mention of some of the different manufacturers. The Green Duck manufacturing that I've mentioned of Chicago and later Fernando, Mississippi, produced doubloons. Osborne Mint, Cincinnati, Ohio, produced and still produces doubloons. Barco, which was Mint, which was later renamed New Orleans Mint, and purchased by Wendell's for years, made doubloons, and that was their main part of their business was making Mardi Gras doubloons. Hamilton Mint, which was at one time located in New Orleans, and actually Alvin Sharp worked for them for a little while, and also of Arlington Heights, Illinois, made doubloons. Roger Williams Mint, which was located in Massachusetts and later purchased by Osborne Mint, was a manufacturer, and Roger Williams was actually producer of some of the early Mystics of Time doubloons. Galaxy Mint, which is known as Galaxy Metals of Titusville, Florida, manufactured doubloons, as well as Wendell's Mint in Ramsey, Minnesota. They still produce doubloons. So what will the future hold for this? There now becomes a lot more limited manufacturers here in the States, with mainly Osborne and Wendell being the sources. But there are some sources in China that's still being used. But for Mobile, I don't know if Mobile will embrace ordering doubloons from China. So it'll be interesting to see what happens after the pandemic times are over with. We'll be interested to see if there's an increase in doubloon production or not. Wooden and plastic doubloons are still available. There's still national manufacturers of those, so there are those options. But we'll just have to see who carries on the tradition in the future. Before I sign off, I do want to mention that I'm working with the Historic Mobile Preservation Society to try to construct and build the largest historical collection of Mobile Mardi Gras doubloons that's ever been collected. Part of that effort is establishing a new doubloon guide using some of the information from the old club and some of the new information that's being acquired to build a new guide so everyone will know what's been produced, and there has been a large number produced over the years. If you're interested in sharing information about the mintage of certain doubloons or doubloons being made by a certain group or a certain person, and you think it's worthwhile, you can go to a Facebook page entitled Mobile Mardi Gras Doubloon Project, and you can use @MobileDoubloon, which will take you there, and you can post there if you would like the information. Any further information and any progress that we have, it will be posted on that site. So I highly recommend that you like the page and become involved. Thank you.